Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's something that happened that convinced you that paranormal activity was actually real? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I grew up in an old house in Maine, so old that previous residents were buried in the side yard with poorly carved headstones. And my bedroom was across the door to the eaves, which was used for storage. The doors could only be opened by an adult and only closed if you slammed it shut with your shoulder. My dad would have to really throw his weight into it. One evening in my teens, after having a really long day, I was tired and cranky. I just wanted to fall into an oblivious sleep. Right as I was drifting off to sleep, the access door opened slowly with the most annoying creaking sound. My oldest sister had always sworn the house was haunted, but I never bought into it. But I sat up in my bed, and the opening was darker than anything I've ever seen. I wasn't freaked out. I was pissed. I was tired and not in the mood for this shit. I told the opening very angrily, "Whatever you think you're doing, knock it off, or I'll find a way to make sure you make it to hell." The door slammed shut, and after fuming as only an angry teen can do, I eventually fell asleep. Never happened again. Brother's home. They always had trouble with plumbing, lighting, and appliances. Disastrous consequences behind multi-failures are causing flooding and fires, forcing them to move out temporarily for multiple remediations over time. One time they asked me to stay over and sit in the house and dog while they were on vacation. I slept there 5 nights, and something happened every night. The best night, I was lying on their couch watching TV after midnight, and the dog was curled up with me when suddenly, plain as can be, came 3 knocks at their back patio door. The door itself and wall were all glass windows. I could see through to the whole patio. No one was there. As if to punctuate, the dog raised his head and low growled at the door, but didn't get up and rush it barking like he does when someone comes to the front door. I got up, opened the door, and went out the back to look around. When I came back inside, the dog was sitting in the middle of the living room barking at the ceiling for no particular reason. Their alarm used to go off too, summoning the police, who got so exasperated at the no problem found that they threatened to start charging for non-emergencies. The last night there, their alarm went off after I left, summoning me back to the house to also find no reason for it. Bro seemed to be in denial over it, but eventually sold the house. He had invested a ton of money remodeling, wanted to stay in it. To this day, won't admit it was haunted, but also won't state why he sold it. I was 10 years old in 5th grade, Creekside Oaks Elementary in Lincoln, California. I can't remember the exact date, but I remember it was a few days before Christmas 2001. My parents, my older brother, and I were sitting in the school auditorium along with all the other families and parents waiting for my younger brother's play to start. They were doing the 3rd grade Nutcracker. Anyway, there was some sort of issue with a couple of the kids in the play arriving late, so it was taking forever to start. I told my dad I needed to use the restroom, so he told me to hurry. I headed out of the auditorium into the hall toward the restroom, but they were locked, and I was a really picky boy, so there was no way I was using the porta potties they had set outside for everyone to use, so I headed toward the staff restroom, which was at the whole other end of the auditorium hallway. Anyway, as you can imagine, since it wasn't an area meant for any of us to use, it was very dark, and they had turned off all the lights, so I just followed the small, dim overhead light right above the staff restroom. Well, literally that second before I was about to open the restroom door, I saw and heard the door to the art room slowly close. I was freaked out, but also very curious. I go into the art room, pitch black, obviously, but at the very corner of the room where the moonlight was coming through, I saw a dark, floating figure wearing what looked like a shredded cape or robe. After about 2 seconds of staring at it, it flies underneath the window blinds and almost like disappears through the window. I peed myself immediately and booked it to the auditorium. You can imagine how bad I was crying when I ran in there, all the parents staring at me, and my parents ran down right away to see what was wrong. I explained it then, I've explained it a bit more recently, but they will never believe me. I've never had anything happen to me before or after that. Aired Spider-Handed Ghost Girl in the same bedroom, starting at about the same age. Years before my brother was born, my sister started having issues sleeping at night. Started insisting on leaving the lights on or sleeping downstairs on the couch instead of risking our mom turning the lights out on her at night. She refused to talk about why. This went on until the day she turned 18 and moved to Hawaii. The day she left, she told me she'd see a girl with long dark hair and spider heads at night. Refused to say more about that. I never said anything. Ashley made me swear because she was certain our parents would think she was crazy. I lived in the room after her for years, but for me it was just a normal room. Same too, for our younger half-sister. At some point, our little half-brother Trevor moved into her old room. He was fine at first, then I found him in the living room one morning. He started sleeping with his light on, started avoiding being in his room, much the same way Ash had about that same age. Made every excuse to not be there. Refused to talk about it, got upset if you tried to question it, just like Ash. Eventually, my mom mentioned that Trevor said he saw a spider-handed girl with long dark hair in his room at night, and that she crawled weirdly. She didn't know about Ash's history in the room or why Ash had left and never came back. I had to push, bribe, and coerce Ashley into telling our mother that she'd seen exactly that growing up. Even then, she refused to say much, just that she'd seen a girl with long dark hair and spider hands crawl in the room at night, and that she didn't want to talk about it. It was just too specific an experience, described too similarly to chalk up to wild, crazy happenstance. The two, without talking, described the exact same thing, with exactly the same avoidance tactics. For them, even now, it was so scarring that they can't sleep with the lights off anywhere. Trevor's almost 18, Ash is nearly 40, and they were both scarred so deeply in that such the same way, it just doesn't seem possible that it's a coincidence. A few odd things have caught my attention, but I think I've shared them. These are just from one home when I was living with my grandparents in their 100-plus-year-old home. I was usually an early riser. My grandmother used to yell at me to go back to sleep if she checked in on me in the mornings. I had all sorts of books to read and notepads to doodle in, so I was good at keeping quiet. My room was in the attic. The only light switch was at the bottom of the stairs, so it was usually pretty apparent when someone was heading up. My grandfather had a closet with some nice shirts up there outside my room, so a few mornings he would head up before dressing for the day. My grandfather died the day prior, and I was quietly sketching something or other. I was really mindful of being quiet, as I knew my grandmother was having a tough time losing her husband and all. The light went on. I heard someone coming up the steps, and I went into totally sleeping mode, tossed the sketch pad, and waited for the sound of the door opening to show my grandmother I was super asleep. I heard some noises in the closet, and then the steps going down the stairs, and the lights click off. I figured my grandmother was picking out one of the nicer shirts, as there was a funeral to arrange. Later that morning, when it was acceptable for me to be awake, I head on down for breakfast. With all the hospital drama and his health, my grandmother said she slept very well, and she no longer needed to worry about any incoming calls with bad news. She already got the bad news. In fact, she had only just woken up. To which I said, "No, I heard you messing with hangers in the closet." She insisted she only just got up, and I didn't know how to feel. The second item was a few years later. If my grandmother had guests over, we could not be in our pajamas. Not sure how typical that is. She had some odd rules. I was maybe 15 for this one. I was heading down for morning, and I could hear the sounds of coffee brewing and what sounded like a spoon hitting the side of a mug, which I assumed was my grandmother with her morning tea. She only made coffee when company was over. Typically, with the rule about how to dress when folks were over, I'd get a heads up so I could be up and presentable before they showed. Hearing the muffled chatter and coffee brewing, I was pretty peeved to have to get dressed already. No warning, so I grumbled through the whole thing. Go get dressed, yada yada. I'm listening, trying to pin the voice of whoever is over. Just know it's a woman talking. Actually stood at the top of the stairs before moving to assess, as she had a few specific friend groups, trying to be a good teen and all, to say hello and good morning. Once my foot touched the third, maybe fourth step, all the sound stopped. No more coffee brewing, no clinking spoons, no chatting, just a dark, silent kitchen. There were a few times after that where I'd be upstairs and would hear laughing, television jingles, and chatting when no one was down there. I would just listen for a while, and it always stopped by the time I got to the middle of the stairs. When you first started the story, I heard, the light come on the day after your grandfather died. I thought the same thing. I figured it was your grandma grabbing a shirt from the closet. So then when it wasn't, what was it? That's a good one. I was about 12 or 13 in the bathroom of my local AMC movie theater. It was during the middle of the movie, so I was rushing to get back to my seat so I didn't miss too much. I was alone in the 4-stall bathroom in the handicapped stall. The 3 stalls next to me were completely empty. The socially anxious part of me always checked before selecting a stall. There was a little sink inside of the handicapped stall without a mirror. So after doing my business and quickly washing my hands, I turned around, and standing there as plain as day was a little girl, aged 6 or so. She was glaring at me with so much hate that I was actually taken aback. She stood there completely still, just glaring. She wasn't breathing either. It was almost like she was a hologram. That's how still she was. My first instinct was to tell her off, since I used to babysit kids her age and had little patience for that kind of behavior. But something about the whole situation felt off. I had only been washing my hands for a few seconds, so I knew there was no way she could have sprinted across the entire room, crawled under my stall, and stood behind me in that time frame, let alone done so without me hearing it. The sink wasn't that loud, and the bathroom was tiled. You couldn't even tiptoe across it without making noise. And as I mentioned, all of the stalls were empty when I entered, and no one entered the room in time I was in there. I would have heard it. Every part of me was telling me to say nothing and get the hell out of there. It almost felt like everyone was holding their breath, even though she and I were the only ones in there. You know that tense feeling in the air when everybody's dreading something that's about to happen? That's the only way I can describe it. Anyway, all I ended up doing was letting out a surprised "oh" before speed walking back to my seat. I was so freaked out that I decided I would wait outside for her to see if she would come out of the only exit after the movie ended. That way, if I saw her, I could tell myself she was just a bored kid playing a stupid prank. But she never came out. My siblings didn't see her in the bathroom either. I refused to go back in. I told my mother afterwards, but she thought I was crazy. To be fair, it sounded crazy to me too. So yeah, I didn't even believe in ghosts at that age, but after that bizarre experience, I wasn't so sure. I go to a college that is rather old and has many stories come from it. But this one happened to me personally. I was in the bathroom one night taking a shower. Now you could hear when the door to the bathroom opened. This was a newly renovated dorm building and everything was well taken care of. When I had gone in, not a single person was in the bathroom and no one came in while I was in the shower either. When I dried off, the sink handle lifted up and water poured as if it had just been turned the sink on full blast. Now, I've had some people tell me it was water pressure, but it felt supernatural to me. When I felt an arm lay on me as I was awake in my dorm, wishing my long-distance fiancé, now husband, was there, made me calm and sleepy. He doesn't remember anything. For him, we were living at his parents' place a few years ago. Important info. I'm a really bad nail biter. He picks his nails short. He had a dream where a demonic woman with claw-like nails lunged at him in the morning. He woke up and told me. He turned to go unplug his phone off the charger and found deep nail marks on his side. I've had some weird shit happen there that could have been explained as me dreaming or my poor vision without glasses. We have not sensed anything since we moved, even after 3 apartments. I told my friend once that I used to smoke so much weed that I convinced myself for 3 months that I needed an exorcism. It's a long story of withdrawal symptoms and other substances resulting in mild psychosis. And I told her about how it was a long road to get back to normal. Anyway, while I'm complaining about my selfish drug abuse bullshit, she's like, "Okay man, I'm gonna tell you a story," and proceeds to tell me about how when she was about 10, her dad was working over in Southeast Asia with her brother-in-law. Apparently, they had a falling out, and this dude curses her dad. He gets all effed up mentally, comes back to Australia to his family, his wife, my friend, and her 2 younger siblings, and everyone in the family can tell something is up with him. Haunting night terrors, etc. They decide to exorcise him because shit is getting out of control. She tells me about her huddling in her room while they're doing the exorcism with her younger siblings and the mom coming in to comfort them. All the voices coming from her dad. She ends up walking in when she's not supposed to and seeing her dad's face looking like a demon. All the time she's telling me this, she's like, "I don't give up if you don't believe me. This is what happened. We can't explain it." Anyway, she goes into more detail, then tells me he's fairly okay now. Every now and again he has episodes where he just needs to be on his own for a bit because he sees certain things. But she reckons he will be somewhat cursed and tormented by whatever demons are following him for the rest of his life. Anyway, the way she told me her story and her conviction was enough to get me over the line. The most generic paranormal story ever happened to me, actually. I and my friends were playing basketball while his parents weren't home during the night. I believe this was winter, so it wasn't late like 8 p.m. or anything like that. We were playing on his driveway with the hoop at the end of it. On the back side of the hoop, there was a hill that led to his backyard. Now, of course, since it was dark as shit at night, you could barely see a thing down there. While we were playing, my friend shot an air ball, and we both watched it roll down the hill. Now, since prior to this, we weren't worried about shit, we went into his backyard with our phone flashlights, searching his entire backyard with no luck. We literally looked everywhere until we gave up and decided we'd look for it the following day, when there was more light, and proceeded to head back up the hill out of the darkness. Once we reached the top of the hill, to our surprise, the ball was sitting in the middle of the court. And the craziest part, that I forgot to mention, is that the grass was moist. So whenever the ball got in the grass, it would be covered in wet grass and shit. The wet grass and all the extra was literally on the ball, but the ball was in the center of the driveway, where we typically check up, covered in grass and dirt. Even though we clearly saw that shit roll down the hill, we both asked no questions and ran straight into the house with questions asked. We basically ran into his room and hid with the door locked until his parents got home to give me a ride back because I was scared shitless. I always sort of believed in the paranormal, but was never totally sure until the first and only time so far that I actually saw something about a year ago. I was dead asleep in my bedroom, and had been for a while, as I had worked to 7 a.m. the next day. Note that I was sleeping on my left side, with my back facing the wall, and my face and body facing the room. I remember being in a dream. I can't recall what exactly I was dreaming though. I just know that unconscious me was invested in the events of the dream. Suddenly, my dreaming was abruptly interrupted like I've never experienced before. There was no sound or movement that woke me. My eyes just opened, and it caught me off guard, as that's never happened to me mid-dream before. Anyways, so my eyes randomly opened mid-sleep, the furniture and familiar shapes in my bedroom came into focus, and so did a pitch-black, darker-than-night figure. It was standing right by my bed, as if watching me. The figure had a kind of maternal-looking silhouette, wide hips and stout. The head seemed to have short hair, or maybe tied back hair, hard to tell. My brain came to a few conclusions in rapid succession. My first thought was pure confusion. I assumed that maybe I was experiencing sleep paralysis. I've experienced it before, but never saw figures, only felt frustrated. So I sat up with my elbow and moved my legs, no sleep paralysis. My next thought was that I was somehow imagining it. I blinked, fully expecting the figure to disappear. It did not. I rubbed my eyes, same result. Then I started to feel a bit worried. I thought it might be my mom, but I just knew it wasn't. Then I worried it was an intruder. All while I'm thinking this stuff, I'm just staring at it, trying to comprehend. After about 30 seconds of staring and thinking, I sat up fully and just said hello. Added silence. Hello? Then I extended my right arm, intending to touch it to see if the figure was a solid person or some kind of sleep fog. The figure took a step back to avoid my arm entirely, then it dissolved into nothing. I picked up my phone and the time said 3:01 a.m. Still had no idea what that was. I've come to think it had something to do with the witching hour. It has never come back, though, and its presence didn't feel particularly frightening or welcoming, just strange.